Hey bookworms, and welcome back to Book Peer. I'm Paul.
And I'm Alice.
If you like what you hear today, be sure to like this episode and subscribe for more great book breakdowns.
So today we're going to be talking about how our brains work, like when we make decisions.
Yeah, sometimes we make decisions without even thinking, and other times we really have to think things through.
Right. And this author says that's because our brains actually have two different systems that control our thinking.
Two systems.
Yeah, he calls them System 1 and System 2. System 1, that's the one that's like on autopilot. It's fast, intuitive, emotional.
So that's like when you're driving and you swerve to avoid something in the road without even thinking about it.
Exactly. Or when you see someone and you instantly form an impression of them.
But those snap judgments aren't always accurate, are they?
That's the thing. System 1, it's great for quick thinking, but it can also lead to some biases.
Biases, what are those?
Well, they're kind of like mental shortcuts that our brains take, but sometimes those shortcuts can lead us to make not so great decisions.
Okay, so give me an example. What kind of bias are we talking about?
One example is something called the availability heuristic.
Availability heuristic. That sounds complicated.
It's actually pretty simple. It just means that we tend to overestimate the likelihood of something happening based on how easily we can recall similar events.
Oh, so like if you just saw a news story about a plane crash, you might suddenly feel scared to fly, even though statistically flying is super safe?
Exactly. Your brain is like, hey, I remember that plane crash, so flying must be really dangerous.
Wow, I totally do that.
Yeah.
So is that where System 2 comes in? Is that the more logical system?
System 2 is the one that helps us solve those more complex problems. The one that analyzes data and makes well thought out decisions.
But it sounds like System 2 doesn't always get a chance to do its thing.
Well, the thing is, System 2, it's kind of lazy. It takes effort to engage it, and our brains, they like to conserve energy.
So we default to System 1 because it's easier, even if it's not always the most accurate. Makes sense.
And the author, he talks about all sorts of fascinating biases that we have because of these two systems.
Like what? Tell me more. I'm hooked.
Well, there's anchoring bias. That's the tendency to be swayed by the first piece of information we hear, even if it's totally irrelevant.
Okay, so like if you're negotiating the price of something and the seller throws out a ridiculously high number, that first number might influence how much you're willing to pay, even if you know it's way too high.
Exactly. It's like your brain gets anchored to that first number.
Wow, that's crazy. So what other biases are out there?
Well, there's the representativeness heuristic. That's where we judge something based on how well it fits a stereotype.
So like if someone's wearing a lab coat and carrying a clipboard, I might assume they're a scientist, even though there are plenty of other jobs that require that kind of attire.
Right. We rely on these mental shortcuts to make quick judgments, but they can sometimes lead us astray.
So it's like our brains are constantly trying to simplify things, even if it means overgeneralizing.
And there's even more biases where those came from.
Okay, I'm ready for more spill the tea.
Well, there's this thing called the illusion of control.
Illusion of control, what's that all about?
It's basically where we overestimate our ability to influence things that are really just up to chance.
Oh man, I'm so guilty of that. Like when I'm gambling and I win, I'm like, yeah, I'm a genius.
Yeah.
But really, it's mostly just luck.
Yeah. We all like to think we're in control more than we actually are.
So how do we know when we're falling prey to these biases? It seems like they're everywhere.
It's tough because a lot of this is happening subconsciously, but that's why it's so important to learn about these biases so we can at least start to recognize them in our own thinking.
Yeah, forewarned is forearmed.
Yeah.
And if you're enjoying this conversation, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Book Peer for more deep dives into the books that are shaping our world. So we've been talking about all these fascinating biases that our brains are prone to.
Right, like how easily we can be swayed by irrelevant information or jump to conclusions.
Yeah, it's like our brains are constantly playing tricks on us.
And there's another one I wanted to mention. It's called the affect heuristic.
Affect heuristic. Now that one sounds pretty complicated.
It's actually not that complex. It just means that our emotions can heavily influence our judgments.
Oh, so like if I'm in a good mood, I'm more likely to make optimistic decisions, even if they're not really realistic.
Exactly. Or if you're feeling anxious, you might perceive risks as being greater than they actually are.
So our feelings can really cloud our judgment without us even realizing it.
It's true, but the good news is that once we're aware of these biases, we can start to mitigate their influence.
So how do we actually do that? How can we become better decision makers?
Well, one important strategy is to slow down and think things through. Don't just react based on your gut feeling.
Like take a deep breath and let that System 2 kick in.
Exactly. Give your rational brain a chance to weigh in.
Makes sense. What else can we do?
Another tip is to try to remove emotion from the equation as much as possible.
I mean, that's easier said than done, right? Our emotions are a big part of who we are.
It's true, but there are things you can do like making a list of pros and cons or seeking out objective advice from someone you trust.
So getting a different perspective can help us see things more clearly.
And the author, he also talks about something called the illusion of understanding.
Illusion of understanding. Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
It's this idea that we often create stories in our heads to explain past events. We try to make sense of things.
So we think we know why something happened, but really it could have been just a random coincidence.
Exactly. We crave that sense of order and predictability, so our brains try to find patterns even when they don't exist.
It's like we're all amateur detectives trying to solve the mysteries of life.
But those faulty narratives can lead to overconfidence and bad decisions.
So how do we avoid falling into that trap?
By being humble, recognizing that we don't always have all the answers, and being open to different perspectives.
It's about embracing uncertainty.
Exactly. And, another big part of decision-making is dealing with risk and uncertainty.
I mean, that's a huge part of life, right? Weighing potential gains and losses.
And this author, he introduces this concept called prospect theory.
Prospect theory. What's that all about?
It basically says that we feel the pain of a loss more strongly than the pleasure of an equivalent gain.
So like losing $100 hurts more than winning $100 feels good.
Exactly. It's called loss aversion. And it can really influence our choices.
Like we might avoid taking risks even if they have the potential for bigger rewards just because we're so scared of losing something.
And then there's framing effects. That's how the way a choice is presented can totally change our perception of it.
Okay, give me an example. I need to see how this works in real life.
Okay, imagine you're presented with two options for a medical treatment. Option A has a 90% survival rate. Option B has a 10% mortality rate.
Those sound like the same thing to me, just worded differently.
Right, but studies have shown that people are more likely to choose option A even though they're statistically identical.
Wow, so just the way something is framed can really influence our decision.
Absolutely. It's all about how our brains process information.
This is so fascinating. It's making me realize how much I need to pay attention to the subtle ways things are presented to me.
And there's one more concept I want to touch on. It's called the endowment effect.
Endowment effect.
Okay.
Lay it on me.
It's the tendency to overvalue things that we own simply because we own them.
Oh, like that old sweater I have in the back of my closet. I never wear it, but I can't seem to get rid of it.
Exactly. Or think about selling a car you've had for a long time. You might ask for way more than it's actually worth.
Because we formed this emotional attachment to it.
And it's not just sentimental value. We also tend to overvalue things we've put effort into, even if that effort was wasted.
So like, if I spend hours building something myself, I might think it's more valuable than if I just bought it pre-made.
Precisely. It's all part of how our brains try to make sense of the world.
This is all so eye-opening. I feel like I'm learning so much about myself and how my mind works.
That's the power of this book. It really makes you question your assumptions and think about things in a new way.
And if you're enjoying this conversation, be sure to give this episode a like and leave a comment, letting us know what other books you'd like us to break down.
We love hearing from our listeners.
And don't forget to subscribe to Book Peer for more insightful discussions about the books that are shaping our world.
We're wrapping up our exploration of this fascinating book about how our minds work.
It's really made me question everything I thought I knew about decision-making.
Right, like how much of what we do is actually driven by logic versus emotion.
We've covered so much ground today, from those two systems of thinking to all those sneaky biases like anchoring and framing effects.
And the illusion of control and loss aversion.
Oh, and don't forget about the endowment effect.
Right, we tend to overvalue things just because they belong to us.
It's amazing how many of these biases we probably fall prey to without even realizing it.
It's like our brains are constantly trying to simplify the world, even if it means taking shortcuts that lead to less than optimal decisions.
So knowing all of this, how can we actually use these insights to become better thinkers?
Well, I think one big takeaway is to slow down and be more deliberate in our decision-making process.
Like, don't just jump to conclusions based on our gut feeling.
Exactly. Give that system, too, a chance to do its thing.
And be aware of those biases.
Yeah.
Recognize when we're being influenced by irrelevant information or emotional impulses.
And don't be afraid to challenge our own assumptions.
It's about being open to different perspectives and embracing uncertainty.
Absolutely.
This book has really given me a whole new appreciation for the complexity of the human mind.
It's a real eye-opener.
If you're interested in learning more about how your brain works and how to make smarter decisions, I highly recommend checking out this book.
It's a game changer.
And if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to like and subscribe to Book Peer for more deep dives into the books that are shaping our world.
And leave us a comment letting us know what other books you'd like us to cover.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.